Piaget also hypothesized that children develop cognitively in 4 stages. The sensory motor stage from age 0 to 2 is, is called sensory motor because basically children at that age do not think without touching or moving. They have to touch and move. They suck things, they bang things, they move things, they try to do things. This is an age where thought and movement and action and touching are all the same thing. They can't think about something in their head without having it right there. The big achievement, one of the big achievements of the sensory motor stage is something called object permanence. And it's when the baby first learns to make a mental representation of an object in their mind and hold it there. It happens about 6 to 8 months in normal children. So before 6 months, for example, you can take a kid to a picnic or church or something, and you can hand that kid to lots of different people, and that baby is perfectly happy. You know, as long as they're held and they're dry and they're not hungry, they're happy. But right about 6 to 8 months, something happens. You hand that kid to a stranger, the kid takes one look at the stranger's face and screams blue murder. Okay? This is the beginning of the formation of attachment to one person, and it can only happen when the child is able to hold an image of typically their mother, but their caretaker, in their head and say, wait a minute, that face I'm looking at doesn't look like mom. Oh my God, it's a stranger, and that's why they scream. This is the beginning of object permanence. Object permanence is terribly important for 2 things. We already talked about attachment. You can't become attached to a person until you can recognize them. You can't recognize them till you have a mental representation of what they look like in your head, or what they sound like, or what they smell like, whatever. Okay, the other thing that object permanence is terrifically important for is language. You can't have a word for something unless you have a representation of it in your head. You can't have a word for doggy unless you have a mental image, a mental representation of dog in your head. Now, your mental representations as you get older get better and better and better, but in that sensory motor stage, your job is to learn how to make mental representations of things in your head. Okay, and you've got a video about a little girl named Lucille, courtesy of one of my TAs, Denise Demisi, from many years ago, who started off as a TA for me teaching a class in Ed Psych, and has now went to the Center for Teaching and Learning here on campus, got a job there when she graduated, and now is moved up into administration in the university and is undoubtedly making more than I am. She did great, but she gave us this video and the later video of Roxanne, and they are her children when they were very young. So if you want to, stop here a minute and look at the video of Lucille. Okay, so the next stage is the preoperational stage. Okay, in the preoperational stage, about ages 2 to 6 or 7, the child has lots of mental representations in their head. Their language explodes during this time, but they cannot manipulate, or what Piaget called operate, on those mental representations in their head. So they can't mentally say, okay, what would happen if I moved this there? What would happen if I squished this? What would happen if I poured this from here to here? Okay? So because of that, and you have a video about Roxanne that beautifully illustrates this, just wonderfully illustrates this. Roxanne is a very bright little 4.5-year-old, but she doesn't have operational thought. One of the operations that Piaget studied the most is conservation. Conservation of number, the realization that if you have a certain number of things, if you move them further apart, it may look longer, but it ain't. It's still that number of things. Conservation of liquid is personally my favorite test to do on unwary 2 to 6-year-olds, and that is to take 2 equal glasses of some kind of colored liquid and pour one of them into a taller or shorter glass and ask them which one is more. They don't know. They say the taller glass is more or the shorter glass is less. Another trick not represented here, but is an absolutely evil thing to do to preoperational children, which every mother learns, is that you hand a kid a cookie, and the kid says, I want 2 cookies, and you take the cookie back, you break it in half behind your back, and you hand it to him and say, here's 2. And if they're young enough, you can fool them, because they can't conserve that matter. They can't realize that just because it's now in 2 pieces, it's still the same amount of cookie. Because they cannot mentally reverse that operation in their head and say, well, now wait a minute, if it was 1 cookie and you split it apart, if you put it together again, it'd be the same. That's what they can't do, okay? Kids who are preoperational also have a tendency toward magical thinking. They believe that if they think something, they're not clear on the difference between what they think and what's real. So very often, for example, little kids get in trouble this way. You have a kid and they're playing with a ball in the house, maybe a 5-year-old, and you say, don't play with that ball in the living room, you're going to break something. And you go away and sure enough, hear it crash, you hear the lamp go down. You go back in, there's the kid, there's the ball, there's the lamp, and you'll say, what did you do? Which is a stupid question because you already know, but that's what parents all do. They go, what happened here? And the kid will tell you straight to your face, I don't know. And you say, you broke the lamp. And they'll say, no, I didn't break the lamp. And partly they're doing that because they don't want to be in trouble. But partly when they're young, in their mind, they didn't think about breaking the lamp. They did not intend to break the lamp. So they didn't break the lamp. The ball broke the lamp. They can't follow that causal chain back. When they come in and tell you that a dragon landed in the backyard, they imagined that. To them, it's real. They don't know the difference. The fact that they can't really discriminate between thought and reality has all kinds of psychological implications at this age. So, for example, if a child's parent dies at this age, very often the child will believe it's their fault because they were angry at their parent or something like that. There's all kinds of weird things that happen here. So if you want to, stop here a minute and watch the short video of Roxanne, who, as I said, is a very bright 4.5-year-old, but still very preoperational. Right around 7, most kids move into the concrete operational stage, which is the 3rd one you see here. And that means that children can operate on the mental representations in their head. They can reverse them, they can turn them around, they can add them, they can subtract them. This is school age, okay? And it's great, but it still has one limitation. Children at this age, aren't at all good at making mental representations of things that they have not originally encountered in concrete reality. In other words, they can make a representation of a ball if they've seen a ball. They can make a representation of a horse if they've seen a horse. But they're not good at all at abstract things. So if things you've never seen. So if you try to talk to them about justice or fairness, to them, the only way they can think about that is the same, equal. So, fairness is everybody having the same number of cookies, the same exact thing. They don't understand how, for one kid, it might be fair to, for example, you might have a kid who can't walk very well. So in gym, they don't have to run, but everybody else has to run. And kids at this age have a lot of trouble understanding that until they see the difficulty that kid has walking. They're also not good at things like justice. If you ask them questions like, if you had a 3rd eye, where would you like it? They will tell you, they'll say, but people don't have 3 eyes. And you'll say, yes, but if you had a 3rd eye, where would you like it? And they'll say, but that's impossible. And you're ready to strangle them at this point. But if you persist and you say, well, I know it's impossible, but pretend you had a 3rd eye, where would it be? Very often this age, they'll say, well, right here in the middle of my, and they'll point to the middle of their forehead because from their point of view, that's where eyes belong. Whereas when a child becomes formal operational, they can start thinking about things that are abstract, that they've never seen or heard of, that are imaginary, that don't exist but could. Now, Piaget said that not everybody reaches this formal operational stage. So a lot of folks are stuck just thinking about the concrete. Again, if you look at our current elections that are coming up, understanding economics is very difficult for most people because most people are still in the concrete operational stage of thinking about economics. They think the government really has a certain number of dollars sitting somewhere, and so when they spend them, they're gone, and it doesn't work that way on the government level. It does on the people level, but not on the government level. Okay, so that's your stages. And however, there have been some important critiques of Piaget since his major work was done in up through the 1950s or 60s. It was when he kind of stopped working. And this comes from people who often call themselves neo-Piagetians. In other words, they change. They say, okay, Piaget was mainly right, but there's this little piece I'm going to change. Okay, one of the critiques is if only about half of people ever reach formal operations, how can that be a normal developmental stage? Another critique is that people are not in one stage at the same time. Okay, for example, if you have something you don't know very much about, in order to learn about it, you're going to have to go back to the concrete stage. You have to see it and touch it and stuff. We're only formal operational in things we really understand well. And if we have to learn things we don't understand very well, think about the last time you had to master a really different kind of computer program. Okay, you had to try it out, that little scientist thing on your computer. You couldn't just read the manual and know how to do it, could you? Whereas William, I might not be talking to you, somebody who knows lots and lots and lots about how computers work, they get a new program, they look at the quick start card, and they've got it, because they have these very elaborated schemes in their heads for how computers work. So basically, people are only formal operational in the areas that they're fairly expert in. Another critique is that different cultures value different kinds of thoughts. So there's a whole lot of cultures who don't think this formal operational abstract thinking is very important at all. They value concrete thinking. Obviously, there are also situational differences. Abstractly, as a formal operator, I know that the sun does not rise and does not set, and the earth actually spins, and that's what causes the illusion of the sun rising and setting. But in other situations, I look up on Weather Channel when sunrise is, okay? And I talk about, well, when the sun comes up or when the sun goes down, we can't do that anymore. So it depends on what situation you're in, which kind of thinking is appropriate. And finally, a lot of people say Piaget's emphasis was too individual. Only later in his life did he start looking at social influences on learning. His image, remember, is that little kid all by himself building that block tower. Okay, so key principles for instruction drawn from Piaget and neo-Piagetians is principle one is people learn actively by trying to make sense of things, often by trial and error. So this is where motivation becomes so important. If it's a behaviorist type of learning, we can make them learn. If it's information processing, they're processing information. And many of you talked about the fact that motivation seemed to be left out there. Piaget is really clear that people don't learn unless they're trying to make sense of something. Principle two, people learn mainly by assimilating new material into previous schemes or accommodating those previous schemes or schemas. So once again, just like in information processing, we find out that learning is built on prior knowledge. Principle three, kids from 6 or so to 11 or 12 are primarily concrete operational thinkers, meaning they need to see it or work with it concretely before they can operate, they can create a mental representation and operate upon it in their heads. This is why using manipulatives in math at this age is such a useful thing. This is why doing science experiments, even if they're not, elaborate, is so important. This is the age when nature study is great because they see it all. Principle four, even adults who are officially formal operational, like all of us in grad school and at the university, we regress to earlier levels, primarily to concrete operational, when we have to work or learn in a field that we don't know very much about. So basically, if you're teaching novices, you always move back to concrete operational. You don't ever start at formal operational with people who are novice in a field. Principle five, If learners feel too great a sense of disequilibrium, they will shut down and stop learning. On the other hand, if they feel no sense of disequilibrium, they won't read. They won't learn anything. So one of the teacher's jobs is to create a little bit of disequilibrium, a little bit of, oh, this isn't how I thought the world was, but not too much of it at a time. Because otherwise, then people just shut down. They can't deal with it.